Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Araceli Hernandez Laroche. I'm a professor at USC Upstate, and I serve on the Presidential Search Committee as the USC System Representative. Before I introduce our distinguished guest, please know that this forum is live-streamed and taped. During the Q&A, please ask your questions clearly so that everyone in this room and virtually can hear us. After the 30-minute presentation, please use the microphones. There's a microphone on each side. If it's too difficult for you to get out of your row, then just raise your hand and I'll run and take a microphone to you, or Dr. Marco Valtorta, who's also on the Presidential Search Committee. We must keep the candidate on schedule, so we apologize if we don't have time for all of your questions. I would now like to introduce our presidential candidate, Dr. William Tate, Dean of the Graduate School and Vice Provost for the Graduate Education at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Tate is the Edward Mellink-Rod Distinguished University Professor in Arts and Sciences. He directs the Center for the Study of Regional Competitiveness in Science and Technology. Welcome, Dr. Tate.
I want to thank the search committee for two members here, at least I see, who invited me for this round. Great honor to be here with you today. I think the time is inverted, but I'll explain that in a second by way of story. And through the story, I hope to tell you why I'm actually here. And so I'm going to start the story with, and imagine a 21-year-old version of me some years ago in Dallas, Texas. I had an opportunity to move there because I had been given a job in the financial sector of TI. So it was a financial analyst position at Texas Instruments University. I was an econ and math minor, very excited about the opportunity. And I get there, and literally they're going to start, and they have what they call a hiring freeze. And I said, what is that? That means that you are no longer able to take this job. And we're going to be waiting you out our financials. My father, being the person that he was, told me I needed to find another job. And I did. I worked in retail, just doing whatever I could at minimum wage, about 60 hours a week, this econ and math guy. And one of my father's friends said to me, didn't you tutor calculus in undergrad? I said, 1 and 2. He said, didn't you TA in the math department in undergrad? I said, I did. He says, what are you doing? Why don't you go down to the school district and get a job teaching math? I said, good idea. So I did. And I go down to the DISD school district and tell them I want, to teach math. They say you don't have a certification. However, you do have a very interesting background. You have this math, you have economics, and you have some sports and athletics in your background, we see. We're always looking for math teachers who can coach. And I thought, this is a double win. I'm winning here. This thing is happening for me. I go home and tell my dad, and I said, I'm going to be teaching math at Woodrow Wilson High School in Dallas, which was the home of the mayors. All the mayors that came out of Dallas went to Woodrow Wilson High School. And it was during a time of great desegregation or desegregation orders, it was the only naturally desegregated school in Dallas. 1/3 Hispanic, 1/3 black, and 1/3 white. And they moved me there, and I got there, and the principal said to me, now, we've hired you to be the basketball coach and the track coach. I said, that's great, I know. He said, but it's going to be women's. I said, well, I've never done that before. I don't know anything. This is the height of Title IX, and it's all flourishing. I said, I don't know. I've never played even basketball or track or did track with women. He says, well, you're going to learn, and you're going to learn fast. And so I want to tell two parts of that story as it relates to this opportunity. The first, I will relate it in terms of the basketball. And it's extremely important in light of this search. Here I was, a young man about to work with these young women, and I thought I knew all about sports. I was all in. I had the background and the like. And I thought it was like men's sport, where you sort of come in and you just say, we're going to run through the wall today. We're going to make it happen. We're going to go out here and we're going to beat these teams. And, it didn't work that way. And from those young ladies, I learned the importance of how to build a team. It was extremely important that they were in good relationship with each other and with me. And we had to communicate all the time about this, more than you could ever imagine. I bought more pizza than you could ever imagine. But it changed me as a leader. I owe them a great deal. I'm going to switch a bit to the math part and come back to the young ladies later. The math was interesting. I'm in the middle of the telecommunications corridor of the United States of America. Texas Instruments and all the companies are just growing at scale around me. And I had to teach 4 classes: Fundamentals of Math 1, Fundamentals of Math 2, Consumer Math 1, and Consumer Math 2. And they did throw in a course called Life Skills because you had to teach 5 sections. My classes were packed. It was a room like this, literally, each section. And I remember going to my mentor, and I said very clearly, how am I going to teach all of these kids? And my mentor said, don't worry, in 4 weeks, half these people will be gone. But it wasn't funny. And he was right. And half of them were gone. And it just shrunk, and that's what they call dropping out, or the attrition rate. That changed me as a leader, watching that in real time. And at the end of the year, I had to have a performance review with the principal. Now, you have to remember, I majored in economics. I thought performance reviews were two-way. I made a mistake. He told me all the things that I did well, and I told him all the things that I was concerned about. Number one, the attrition that was happening in the math classes. I said, if it's happening like this in this school, and we can add up the number of schools that exist here in Dallas, this is a massive problem. I'm an econ major. I'm always thinking about scale. And he said, it is. I said, well, what can we do? Moreover, we were teaching them arithmetic, and they need to know algebra and geometry and all the other more advanced math courses. He said, but that's what they need, and that's what they've got. And I said, well, if I'm going to teach arithmetic, you should send me down to an elementary school. And he did. And the next year, I taught algebra to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students and 6th graders using Socratic method of teaching. You all know the Socratic method? Lots of questioning. An amazing experience for me, personally. And I remember one day, I got good at this, you all. I mean, I was good. I had those questions popping, and that math was going with those little people. And we were learning, and it was really exciting. And I remember a young girl raised her hand and said, Mr. Tate, I know who Socrates was. And I thought, man, I'm doing math and history. She said he was a philosopher, and he talked too much, so they killed him. Put in your place by the young people. But I tell you this story, number one, because I'm going to invert the time and give you time to talk. I don't want you to kill me. I want you to have time to talk. But I tell this story for a number of reasons. Because some years later, and I was going to wait to the end, but I'm going to tell you what really happened. Let me back up a second. I was literally moved to change my career because of these young people. I thought I was going to be an economist. I became really interested in math education. Went to graduate school at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I was treated with tremendous dignity. I was given a scholarship from ARCO, an amazing investment in my life. My textbooks cost more than the tuition. It was an unbelievable partnership that the state had with me to help me move forward. The mentors were amazing, and ultimately I went off to get a PhD because they encouraged me to do it. And I went to the University of Maryland and stayed in math education because I wanted to end the disparities that I saw in STEM fields. It motivated me. It is who I am. It changed me deeply, and I became committed to that as a researcher. I move off and go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where the Wisconsin idea is burned into my system. And if you don't know what that is, it's that every single, it started in 1905, that every single thing that the University of Wisconsin is doing should impact every family in the state. In other words, you're going to be impactful for your state. South Carolina first. That's what this is about. That's why I'm here. That's why I want to talk to you. Because everything we do here should be impactful for the state and adding tremendous value. And I learned that at Wisconsin, and it was extremely important. But I got a call later from Dallas while I was a tenured faculty member helping run a research center dealing with systemic reform, which you might know as standards-based reform or No Child Left Behind or accountability-based reform. We were designing the framework for that up at Wisconsin, working with the federal government. And NSF, the National Science Foundation, was giving grants out for something called systemic reform. And you may have had one here in this state. If I recall, you did have a state systemic initiative here. And there was an urban systemic initiative in Dallas. They called me and they said, we need a project director and somebody to lead this. And so I told my wife, I said, that's funny. They need somebody to lead the urban systemic initiative in Dallas. You know, Dallas is, you have to be from there to make it happen. And she just looked at me and I said, you know what? I'm going back. Because the Wisconsin idea was burned in me. I needed to give something back to the place I started. And I went back, and you'll never, ever guess what happened. One of my first responsibilities was to go back to Woodrow Wilson High School and to evaluate the math program of the same principal. And I walked in the door, and it went from being Mr. Tate to Dr. Tate. And I'll tell you my first thing I said. How's your math program? Point of fact, never forget faculty governance. I learned a tremendous lesson from that experience. He sort of dismissed me. I didn't take it as disrespect during the interview process. But he had no idea, nor could he anticipate almost 2 decades later, this little 21-year-old guy was going to come back as a former faculty member in this place and be evaluating him. But my expectation is that every faculty member in a university is engaged in that and holding account the administrators in the institution. I learned that from that experience. I know how it goes around. And so one of the things I want to highlight and say to you, I learned at Wisconsin and I learned from that experience that faculty governance and listening to faculty members is extremely important. But I'll take it a step further because I know faculty are very busy. The people that actually run universities, take no offense, faculty, are the staff. And you have to listen. And so when I talk about South Carolina first, I'm talking about you being part of the leadership and putting this state first. It's everything. It's how you can go forward. I know you've had a great president here. In fact, I said to every group I've met with, historically, he may go down as one of the greatest presidents in the history of American higher education. He might. Think about the financials that he had to manage. Think about the community that's been built here. This is amazing. But in order to keep South Carolina first, all of you are going to have to be completely engaged. Every single one of you are going to have to be your very, very best. What's special about this place is that it's feasible from the 2-year institutions all the way to a flagship research environment to open the doors of this entity to everyone in the state. It's so special. And that's the reason I got off the plane and said I wanted to have a conversation with you about South Carolina first. Now, this is supposed to work. Maybe it won't. I'm not sure. It's going incrementally. I will take incremental change as long as it's positive. I'm going to say to you that just like the young woman told me about Socrates, and I learned that the students were actually at the center of everything. So who I am and what I am as a professional is that everything that I want to do and everything that I'm committed to is about the students. And everything else, the business matters, all have to point toward how we're adding value to them. That's really what these institutions are about. That's part of the partnership. That's why the state invests in us. That's why you had the Morrill Act and all the different things that focused on higher education, because we were supposed to be stewards of that investment for our students. It's everything. Now, like your current president, I'm an epidemiologist. It's part of my life. And if you're any kind of epidemiologist at all, and you're worth a nickel, you have a motto. And I have a motto, but I'm not going to bore you because I know time's of the essence. But I want to say, if you think about the student experience, what we have to be attentive to going forward are the financial issues and the investment related to that, and making sure that it's accessible, that there is great socialization, that they are engaged with faculty members and mentors, and they have an opportunity to add value to the academic enterprise, that they have an opportunity, and I said to the students earlier today, that you really haven't had a true college experience unless you've done undergraduate research or written an independent paper with a mentor who's giving you feedback. If you haven't had that, then you're just accumulating credits, and that's not what we want. That's not what real education is. You have to have mentored experience and feedback. You also need to take a look at what the satisfactions are among the student bodies in terms of the academic programs and why people leave. Degree to completion is extremely important. You do not have to have a PhD to know that generally at most colleges and universities around the country, that by the third semester, you lose 10 to 25% of an entering cohort of students. And it happens over and over and over again. And every time you lose those students, the opportunity structure related to their lives is gone, but something else happens because we're an interdependent system. Every investment in them that we could have had long term to do many things is gone as well. So it chips and erodes at your very essence, the financial and who you really are as an institution. So keeping people here is extremely important. I take a public health perspective on it. I think it needs to be a developmental perspective. I can talk about it in Q&A. And then finally, we're invested in as state institutions because we're in the business of helping people realize their true dreams and careers. Every single investment, if you go across and you talk to someone in the state legislature, why do they want to give to a university? It's rarely about anything, sports aside. I know where I am. Sports aside, it's usually because they want people to have great careers and to be able to invest in the economic well-being of the state. And so the extent to which you're robust and do that well is important. But I don't just show this model for these reasons. I show this model because I believe that you should aspire for something greater than you currently are. And I believe, I was told during the airport interviews, it wasn't really an airport, but that's the way you describe it. The airport interviews that you were invited to be in the AAU in 1904. You should have said yes. But since you didn't, you can't look back. That's the big part of being a leader. You have to go forward. And I think that that's got to be a big part of what you do. And this particular framing about who you are and who gets admitted is a big part of that. I'm just foreshadowing where I'm headed. But I think there are a lot of things that are extremely important about the student conceptual model of who we are that you have advantages at right now. Let me talk about your advantages. We call those distal factors, things that happen before students actually get to the university, distant. And we don't control the legal sex of students. We don't control their race at institutions. We don't control their parental background, or their parents' background, when they matriculate in school, none of those things. But all those things influence what happens when they get here. The extent to which we understand those distal factors and we can create pathways for students from various backgrounds to matriculate in our environments with success is important. I think that has to be a foundational aspect of the experience here. I said I was going to talk about what you do well. By every metric in every group, rate your student affairs entity as elite. But it could always be better. You're always pushing. But I want to bring it up because it's important. You're a place of accessibility. And I said, and I've said throughout the time I've been talking this long and wonderful day, that there are two kinds of universities, the do's and the don'ts. How many of you heard my talk already? A few of you. Oh, good. Most of you haven't. Well, let me say it this way. On this distal factor, it's extremely important. The do universities, DO. I'm a math guy, so we're going to use the D and the O. These are places where you go to discover the opportunities of your future. And if you're really great, like you are. You have accessibility at scale, and you do have accessibility at scale in your system. It's amazing. So there's a great opportunity to come and discover your future. But the OD part of this is different. It switches. These are places where you have an opportunity to discover and engage in creating new knowledge. And when you combine accessibility and the ability to create new knowledge in that environment, you're talking about an elite institution. And that's what exists in this context. You might not think of yourself as elite, and I hope you don't, because there's another kind of university. It's called the don'ts, and they're known by who they exclude. Their brand is based upon who they don't admit, based upon these distal factors. You don't ever want to be in that category. And it's part of the reason I got off the plane here in Columbia, South Carolina, to talk to you about being a do university and continuing in that vein. Because the do universities are at risk. And I'll explain to you in a bit why. Why do you want to be a do university? Here in South Carolina, increased access is extremely important. You see the distribution from a map from the Statistics Census Institute. You have varied levels of access to higher education and actual degree attainment across the state. What would be optimal if that was a really dark, what color are your colors? Yeah. How about that? So if that map looked like that, you're really doing it. And that's what this is about. It's about creating greater access, turning that map to garnet much, and don't get mad at the colors here. We did our best. But, it's just hard, Why is it important? Because people that get touched by higher education, their lives are changed financially. I talked to you about my own experiences. It was a huge deal for me to be able to go to the schools I attended. It changed my whole life and what I can do for my children, my family, extended and the like. And I think it's important. I say this, and I'll say this to you, it's very dangerous because I'm on tape, but it's better to go to college and flunk out than not go at all. It really is. Now, I don't want anyone not to make it. We have to have standards, but we have to provide support. High help, high expectation environments are the best environments. Every researcher who is worth a nickel knows that. And so the extent to which we can create those kinds of environments is everything so that we can have more people touched by college and change their economic well-being. I usually have a map up here if I'm doing the sociology of ed. It says if we do this, you actually receive residual effects. These people pay taxes, and they invest in South Carolina, and they make this place better. They stay out of jail. They have better health. They do everything that we need them to do, and they vote more. They're greater citizens. It's everything, so it's foundational. It's one of the reasons I got off the plane. See, it was supposed to pop like that for you, but we're doing incremental change, so it's all good. This is a map that I wanted to show you. I'm a geospatial guy, so I want you to know who I am. But this map is interesting. I use blue here. The darker the blue, the better it is. These are patent rates by childhood community zones. Patent rates by where people are born. And if you look at it, it's supposed to pop, and I'm going to go forward, but it didn't pop, but we'll make it pop. If it popped forward, that's the southeast in the bubble, and it's largely shaded white. That means there's a smaller patent rate in the southeast than it is in the rest of the country. The north is very dark with the patent rates. The west is a mixed bag, and the northeast, I consider that very different than the Midwest. The Midwest and the Northeast tend to dominate in where the patents are right now. What would, just dream with me for a second. Just dream with me for a second. Imagine 10 or 15 years from now, if that map was dark blue for South Carolina. I'm not talking politics here, people. I'm talking patents. All right? So imagine that. Imagine if together we could do that. Because I'm going to tell you, if we don't, we're in trouble in the United States of America. Let me explain as a demographer and epidemiologist. The outmigration in the North is significant. The Southwest, Texas being the largest recipient, has a tremendous in-migration. They have a serious problem as well. They don't have a job opening, so I'm here with you. Just teasing, I'm not going back to Texas. I'd rather be here. But we've got to fix that. And if we could fix that together, it would change everything, because this is where the largest migrations are happening, highest birth rates and immigration of people. So if we could change that, it would also change your economy. It would change everything for the better. We will become the destination as the North is deindustrializing. That's extremely important. And it's part of the reason I got off the plane, because I think we could do it together. Now, we have a challenge. I talked a little earlier, and it's a complicated challenge. It's a confidence challenge. There have been a bunch of surveys outlining why some American citizens are not really happy with American higher education. So let me describe some of it. This is a study from the AAU, and they say, the question is, which are the most important areas for the government to provide funds? I'm glad they think, this is the high end, medical systems. I would think it would be higher. All of us deal with maladies of some sort, but it's only at 34%. Banks, why are we giving money to the banks? Well, we know why, but that's another story for another day. But the reality is people felt more confident in giving money to banks in terms of providing them funds than they did for public schools, which I count you as one. They're also more likely to give money to all these other things than colleges and universities. Only 4% of the people felt like it was important. And only 1% felt like it was important to give it to the leading universities in America. Because mostly they're categorized as the don'ts, places that exclude, and they build their whole brand on being exclusive. The accessible do's have a shot. That's you. Because at least 4% of the people want to give to you. And those are the people we need to talk to. I think it's that way. Where's your state house? That way? That way. Those are the people we need to talk to. The people who felt like we were on the right track say the following kinds of things. They're enthusiastic. That's us faculty members. They're enthusiastic. They focus on facts. They're helping with educated workers. That's a huge theme. They take advantage of attracting the brightest intellectuals and give them an opportunity to engage in research and development. They provide an education that's far and away the best in the world, and I still think we do in the United States. On the wrong track, they say we're too liberal. They think we cost too much. You're kind of dealing with that here directly with sort of freezes and being very careful about your tuition. They believe that universities are money-driven, that they don't accept a variety of points of view, and they're not affordable. So money and political ideology of the faculty is what they're talking about. That's a huge deal. I'm going to pass on that because I want to give you more time. Socrates is speaking, and he didn't make it. But when we look at it, I wanted to bring this up in terms of confidence in higher education. A lot of times, colleagues think that it's one party or the other that doesn't have confidence in higher education. If you look at between 2015 and 2018, it actually dropped for all American adults. The greatest drop was with the Republicans, but it was bipartisan and independents as well. That's not good. And whoever takes this job has to be able to talk to all of these groups, because fundamentally about 10% of your budget comes from individuals who identify in one of these scenarios, and it's extremely important that you be able to, that they want to invest in you. Same data, different chart. Same data, different chart. See, I'm good at that. Socrates said the same thing some years ago. I'm teasing. AAU membership. I'm a person who believes in holding the mirror up. The way I lead is I have a set of P's that guide me. Number one, you have to have priorities. You have to know what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. You have to be clear about that, and you have to stay singularly focused, especially in an environment as large as this one. You have to have great people around you. The people include postdocs, doctoral students, undergraduates, faculty, and staff. In order to make the run to the AAU, you have to have faculty who are award-winning, who also receive external funding. You have to have great doctoral students, and you have to have a wonderful undergraduate experience. So people matters. And then you have to be able to hold a mirror up. You have to manage and look at your progress and use empirical evidence to guide it. And so that's a big part of how I would lead. These metrics, no matter what, are the key metrics for assessing the institution and looking at its progress going forward. There are 2 phases to get in the AAU. I won't bore you with the 2 phases, but these are part of 1 and 2. There are other parts, and if you want to talk about it in the Q&A, we can. But I think it's extremely important that we focus on that and be able to hold a mirror up and look at progress. I'm foreshadowing. Now, I had other P's, public relations. You have to be able to communicate extremely well, internally and externally. And then, once you learn from holding the mirror up, finally, as old point guards, you have to be able to pivot and change. And all of this is time and situation. I'm a point guard by training. That means I don't throw the ball to certain people at the end of the clock, because I know what they're going to do. They're going to throw it away or they're going to miss. Part of the AAU indicators is investing priorities with people you think are going to be big hits. And you throw it to them in time and situation and you try to win. And so I think that's important. I'd like to really round out my remarks with a couple of things about who I am as an intellectual, because I think it's extremely important if you're going to lead a major research institution that you have sort of an intellectual agenda that has guided you. That's just my personal preference. You're free to decide any way you want, but I know what I think about. And your motto starts with learning humanizes character. And I think that's extremely powerful. What I've tried to do as an intellectual in working both in academic settings, but I also work with practitioners and policymakers throughout my career, is I try to take everything we've learned and help them to see the essence of the humans that we're talking about. And so in St. Louis, I've been part of a group called For Sake of All. It's changed its name to Health Equity. And what we tried to do was really be clear with our local policymakers about the evidence related to health and well-being. We tried to do what your motto says. We tried to help them learn to humanize character. It's extremely important to us. I've tried to do that in math education. I started my story off. That's how I got started in what I'm doing. And see, this slide, let me tell you, would have been amazing. But we're going to keep going. I've also tried to think about community and context, a big part of who I am. You're not just the University of South Carolina. You're in the middle of a community. You're part of a broader community, a state, but also a local community. My research has really been about amplifying what communities should be and how we can do the very best for the people that we're operating with. Can't wait for some of the questions on this front, because this is my lane and what I'm really excited about. And so I would say to you, basically and simply, that my entire career has been about your university motto. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tate. For many years that I've been here, we've talked about reaching for the AAU, and I've enjoyed seeing it in your priorities. Will this be a priority, and how would you go about evaluating what we are in order to know where we have to go?
All right, so the first metric for AAU that you pay attention to, and it's the one that's publicly accessible. And the HERD data 2017 is your research expenditures. You're about 208 million right now. Some of your nearest neighbors include Brown and Georgetown and Notre Dame on the private side. In SEC, some of the nearest neighbors include, you're ahead of Mississippi, Alabama, and some of those schools, a little behind Kentucky, a little behind Georgia right now. I hate to say that, but a little behind. And those institutions are the ones you have to begin benchmarking on. You have to pass them by because everybody's in a race. And right now, if you ask me if I were benchmarking the race, Georgia and North Carolina State University and possibly the University of South Florida on their research expenditures, $400 to $500 million a year are very close. The key for this entity to be successful, in my opinion, and some of it's already been laid out in proposals, your medical school function has to be elite. And I don't mean elite in terms of exclusionary, but in terms of the research function. And if that could happen, you probably need more laboratory space. A new building is what I saw proposed. That simply is something that needs to be on the agenda of the next president here. If you can do that, along with looking at what's happening with engineering and some of your arts and sciences programs that generate revenue, and some of the social science areas that also could generate revenue, and begin a culture of making that possible. One thing I can't see is I don't know your policies and incentives for engaging in this kind of behavior, and are there disincentives, but that has to be thought through. And once you start creating that context and culture for it, you have a real shot. I mean, you could get there because you have the accessibility, you have great undergraduate students, that part's taken care of. This is a draw. The North is deindustrializing, losing population. People are coming here, so you can draw talented individuals here. The climate is amazing. So there's also a global reach. There are many, many students who might want to come here from other places. They're rank sensitive generally when you're recruiting international students at the graduate level, but you try to pick some targets that were really great and already doing well, and you begin to get a little more global with that front. That doesn't keep anybody from the state of South Carolina from participating, especially in PhD education. And you march on, but it's going to require some capital. I'll be frank with you, another number might be $2 billion. I don't know if you have $2 billion worth of people who want to give to your institution, but a hospital/clinical/research infrastructure/improving engineering and the things that are related to those fields requires a lot of capital investment. That's what has to happen, basically. At the same time, you can't lose a ground on anything else. That's a mouthful. So your other areas have to stay strong, and you have to remain accessible. But that would be sort of the blueprint for making it happen.
Is this on? Is this on? Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciate a lot of the things you said about education, especially working in a certification area myself here at the university. I work in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I'm just curious about, it's very easy to talk about STEM fields and what does that do for an institution in terms of revenue that's being generated, in terms of things like graduate education degrees. But how do you, if you're lobbying to a legislator or maybe a potential donor, how do you talk about what sometimes in the arts and humanities are discussed as the intangible benefits of an education in the liberal arts, which actually through my research, they're not really intangible.
I was going to correct you, but in a very polite way.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So how do you include that in your story, and what place does that have in terms of your efforts to lobby on behalf of education?
I think we might have talked about this earlier in the faculty meeting, so it's worth repeating. I don't think you have a great university unless the humanities and the arts are very strong. It's extremely important it's the essence of our humanity captured. I often tell people, you might take it this way, ignorance of history is the parent of invention, or it used to be said the mother of, but I'm going to be broader. And the reality is that what we lost over time and we bring back to life in historical form and fashion, as well as what we create because I tried to see the OD universities discover and create was not limited to STEM, but we create things in the arts, we create things with dance, we create things with plays, and we create things even in digital media, which is the new way that people are articulating their story, if you will. And so I think those are very important parts of what have to happen at a university. And I think there are a lot of people who are keen on investing in those areas as private gifts, because that's a big part of, I've walked around your campus. I mean, it's historic. So I have no doubt that you have people who would want to make sure that stayed alive, and it certainly would be a priority. It's been in my own work as a Vice Provost for Graduate Education. I think I mentioned earlier, we're creating an arts, design, creativity hub that will include poets, engineers, anybody that's thinking about design in residence together, colliding, and we're going to put a group in there to manage it called Tech Artista. They work at the nexus of art and technology, and they're going to help them build social entrepreneurship activities. These are professional students and PhD students all in tandem, and that's going up in the fall. So I'm very keen, I'm excited about that, and I think it's part of the future. It's never going to go away. Are we switching back and forth? Earlier, that was the deal.
Dean Tate, it's quite an honor to have you here. So my research background as a doctoral student, I use both education and public health as well. I've taught to Dr. Latson Billings, like about your work and have since read it. And so I just want to say thank you. It has given me a new sense of identity as like a future scholar, as well as a home. And I try to combine what it seems like to be two quite disparate fields who think they talk to each other but actually don't. And so with that, my experience on campus so far has been wonderful, such that we have this cross-pollination sometimes of education and public health in terms of small research groups, the cross-pollination of dissertation committees, et cetera, but I still feel that in terms of critical racial scholarship, education and public health, we are still so far behind, not just here, but in the whole country, in looking at racial inequality in education as well as public health, and not just in terms of disparity, but in terms of critical racial experiences and racism. And so trying to find a buy-in to that is difficult. And so having said that, in terms of of the existing cross-pollination that is already happening, two parts of the question is, I guess, how would you make the cross-pollination more institutional and scalable, at this university, as well as it's in the community, yet hear those rich minoritized voices that so often get muted in cross-pollination, in public health, as well as education. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. A tough question, because one of the great features of American higher education that we're afforded is that individual faculty members are, they can engage in parallel play like children. Understand what I mean? They're free to build their own research programs, and they can look at other people build theirs, and they can be very successful not just gazing at the other person's work, but they don't really have to fundamentally engage it to be rewarded. So our systems generally in higher education are in parallel play, which, by the way, was in the letter I wrote in terms of the letter for this presidency, that we needed to get out of the business of parallel play and figure out a way to be more interdependent in what we do. That said, specifically to the question, one of the things that people can do, one of the ways to do that is generally in the provost's office, there's at great universities, they figure out how to perturb the system with money. And so you tend to say things like, we're interested in some kind of cross-collaborative, transdisciplinary course or / research endeavor. And we're going to give you some front money. If you're shooting for the AAU, you want it to be a research endeavor. And then you would have them use that as a seed money or planting an idea. And then the goal would be for them to go get larger external money based upon that seed money. Sometimes it's classes that you say you want to have the health folks and the education people working together on something that's going to be a developmental pathway that's going to enrich the lives of women or of people of color or whatever the target you might be working on based upon the evidence to bear. But the point is you can incent that with calls, giving generally some money to get people to think about it together. We've done that at WashU. We created some institutes from that and then gone after large amounts of money. But we've done it in different fields like data science. That's how we built that infrastructure. And it's really going well. Those folks are about to get a big, I can't say right now, but they're doing well. And the upshot is that's the ambassador role that deans and the provosts have to play with encouragement from the president that that's an extremely important activity to engage.
Hi. So there's been some discussion already about funding for education. I'm a doctoral student in the School of Education. I'm in a cohort of 3, yet there was no research funding for me.
Can I stop you 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you come?
Why did I come? Well,
Yeah.
because I was told that the situation may change year 2.
Okay.
And
all right.
then didn't.
All right. All right.
So I had to look for funding in another department, which I did find. I did say if there was no graduate assistantship, I would not come. And that was a conversation that did happen with my advisor. But as far as graduate assistantships, the departments are allowed to establish their own funding and set their own bars. So I have a graduate assistantship that is $13,000 a year, whereas my cohort members, and I didn't know this at the time when I started, have $20,000 a year packages.
In the same class, same school, same...
No, different departments, but we are in the same cohort as a group. So that's a huge disparity that I'm expected to still conduct research on my own time, whereas theirs are built in. So I'm expected to work harder with fewer resources and honestly less opportunity because I have to do it on top of 20 hours to the university. How would you address the disparities between the graduate assistantships here on campus?
I face the same problem. That's my job every day. If you ran the numbers at WashU, the disparities are stark. The STEM fields generally are in 12-month stipends. Usually those students are funded from the National Science Foundation or the NIH, which have thresholds in which they are allowed, that they would be paying into. It also includes tuition in many of them as well. And then in non-STEM fields or in some social science fields that don't have as much robust funding externally, the students are funded through college or school money, and then those schools distribute that in a way that it sounds like you've experienced. And the difference, it can be stark. I mean, it could be the difference between $18,000 and $31,000 to $33,000 a year. That's how it is at WashU. So what we've done is to, in those fields that are outside the STEM area, we've increased the stipend amount by increasing the amount of months that we're paying. So by the time 3 years, right, we went from 10 months to 11 months to 11.25 months. And in the next 3 years, we'll be at 12 months, which would take those students to a very strong floor. That's the arts and sciences students who are part of that 40%. And the key to doing that, and this is very hard, and that's why I asked you why you came, or why did you come, because in order to move those stipends up, you have to take fewer people. There's no new money coming. Like the cavalry is not coming through the door, is what I tell the doc students. And so in order to do that, in future classes, we'll take smaller classes, but make sure everybody has this floor that we think is, it's about 27, 28,000, very different than the one you're dealing with right now. And I think that's the kind of conversation you need to have. How many doctoral students do you need? I think you only should have the ones that you can afford to give a reasonable living. And the others should find their way to another institution where they might be able to have a greater stipend. I'm not saying that to try to create a disincentive for you to leave at this point, but what I'm really trying to say in frank, stark terms is that's the kind of conversation you want to have, especially if you want to make an AAU run. because that's not a good look in terms of an AAU run. That kind of disparity is not a good look. It's not the way they would benchmark that, and it would be extremely negative. That's the kind of thing that has to be fixed. And so the way to do it is you take more, and you take fewer students, and you try to have, it becomes a little bit more comparative. It does become a little bit like a don't place at the PhD level. Accessibility at the undergraduate level, and then at the PhD level, the pipeline narrows a lot. Largely, and I'll say this, it's unethical how many people we're giving PhDs to in light of what the job market is. But that's another story for another day. But I think that I think you have a kindred spirit in understanding that. I mean, I've been working in that vortex for 5 years, and we've actually moved the needle on it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Tate. I'm here with a group of students to read a statement to you and pose a question to you about the process that led to the selection of 4 male finalists for the president of our university, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So in its 218-year history, the University of South Carolina has had 28 presidents. Some of them were remembered and some left little mark on this place, but they all shared this. All 28 past presidents of the University of South Carolina have been men. The search committee appointed to identify the next president was 82% male. The committee selected 11 male semifinalists and then 4 finalists who were also men. We are not attacking the qualifications of you or any of the other candidates. We are criticizing the process that led to their selection. The university takes pride in the makeup of its student body, and though women comprise 55% of undergraduates on this campus, they lacked equal representation. The president is the face of our institution and represents USC to the outside world. He or she symbolizes the university itself, embodying the values of our Carolina Creed. The president is a reflection of the university, and yet we are given a search committee that looked nothing like the body it was supposed to represent. And they gave us a finalist pool that is not representative of the students they are trying to lead. Though we noticed inequality in the committee in the fall, we did not choose to act because the committee expressed an interest in diversity. We gave them the benefit of the doubt and trusted that they would deliver. They have failed, and now we are speaking up. Today, we represent 32 student organizations and more than 85 faculty members from the University of South Carolina Columbia campus. We are faith groups and pre-professional organizations, student activists, and social clubs. Our organizations have different goals, different memberships, and sometimes very different opinions, but we are united in our frustration in the ability of the selection committee to produce a representative pool of finalists. This search committee does not look like us, and as a result, neither do the finalists. We need to start again. We are calling on the trustees of this university to add more diverse voices to the search committee. We ask for more transparency and an honest conversation about why there is such an absence of female representation. We are calling on this new committee to reform their methods, to fix what caused them to miss qualified women for this position, and to return with a diverse pool of finalists that are qualified to lead this university. You cannot be what you cannot see. If the role of this university is to train the future leaders of our state, our country, and our world, the University of South Carolina cannot continue to leave over half of its students unrepresented and present an image that excludes women. For all the strides women have made over the years, and we congratulate this university on enrolling and employing women at high rates, women remain barred from the university's highest office. This moment, this presidential search, is our opportunity for progress. USC boasts that there are no limits to what we can learn, experience, and achieve, yet its highest office has been limited exclusively to men. By maintaining an all-male presidency, the university is placing limitations on women and their ability to have their voices heard at the highest echelons of USC. It has been 218 years. If we do not use this opportunity to shatter these limits, when will we? So the question I have for you, Dean Tate, is if you were selected as president, you would have a role in selecting the next provost of this university. If your committee to identify candidates only identified 11 candidates, all of them men, would you consider this an acceptable result, or would you demand more gender diversity? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. I have another question, though.
Yes, sir.
So I listened to you, but I'm going to frame it in a different way because I would like to have an exchange. Would you be standing there if I wasn't standing here? In other words, if there was nobody like me in the pool, would you be standing there? Would you all be standing there right now saying that there wasn't a black person in the pool, or whatever the identity that you want to have? I just want to know, because before I answer your question, I want to know what's in your heart. What would you be doing that?
Yes, sir. I think the finalists are not only unrepresentative of gender diversity, but I think there also could be great strides in racial diversity. We don't have any LGBT community members represented here that are students and faculty on our university, and I think all of them should be represented.
Excellent. So you answered that very well. And so my response to you, and I appreciate you going back and forth with me because that's how I operate, is that number one, let me begin by going back to the story I started with about the young ladies that I coached who changed me. I have transcended from being a coach to being an academic leader. And in that context, my history is pretty transparent. When I had to hire 4 senior members of the graduate school, they were all women. They came from the best universities in the United States, 2 from Princeton, 1 from Cornell, and another from the University of California, San Francisco. I picked them because they were the very best and that they would actually exemplify and set a model for the rest of the campus. When I was a department chair, I hired 100% women in the context that I was operating in, largely because they were the very best candidates I had. One of them has gone on to be the first African-American woman to receive tenure in arts and sciences and promoted to full professor, and the second one just was promoted. They're elite and they're outstanding. So what I would demand of the people around me is to bring me the very best candidates that you have. I certainly want them to be representative of our student body and representative of the state, and I think that's feasible to do in looking for a provost and in looking for other senior members of the cabinet, and would hope that that would be the outcome of any search that would happen. Now, I had nothing to do with this particular search other than showing up here. And I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to chat with you, but expect me to press you on many things on this front. It won't just be the gender piece, but it will be on all forms of who the state of South Carolina is and are they actually present here. I think that's extremely important and valuable. I respect 100% your stand, and hopefully if I'm selected, we can work on a plan to make sure that it's more representative in a lot of different ways. Thank you.
My name is Rick Ackerman, and I represent, at least in my own mind, maybe some others here, the community that you spoke about. So I'll give you a heads up. I came here cold, just like you may come here cold, without any prior relationship to the state, the city, or the university. And in this 10 years, it's become a huge part of my life. And I am an occasional student. I am a senior citizen. I'm also, as I said, a resident of the community that surrounds this campus, and I'm a donor. So my question and the problem that I want to offer you affects all of those 3 views of me, if you'd like to think of it that way. And that is, this university and this community has a serious alcohol and drug problem. And it is fostered by a very dangerous part of our town, which is 5 Points, you probably know. But I don't want to focus on bartenders accompanying students to ask the driver what their name is or to go to a specific area. I want to talk about not putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound, but looking at the underlying reasons why we have these problems. Why do we have underage drinking? Why do we have an excess of drug use? And what is the university going to do to protect its students and its neighborhoods, and ultimately, if this doesn't get fixed, potentially its donors?
Well, what would you do? You've been living here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I want to hear from you.
I'll give you 2 suggestions. I'll give you 1 suggestion. I'll give the university a 2nd suggestion. The first suggestion is you get in the face of the city council. The university is the elephant in the neighborhood. And if they don't pay attention to the elephant in the neighborhood, they'll ultimately suffer. So that's one thing. You need to let them know that you are expecting them to help you ensure the safety of its students.
So you need a partnership with the city.
Yeah, I don't think you do anything on your own anymore. We talk about collaboration. I think that's the only way you get things done. But the second thing is economic, and you're an economist. And if this university, we have a really fantastic movement here with a mission, with an objective. If this university looked at this problem, and I'm really going to aim this at the students because they seem to be the activists, if they got together and said, we're not going down there ever until this problem is fixed, until the density of bars is reduced, until the closure of bars at a reasonable hour is fixed, until we feel safe that the elements that go down there that cause danger to us are gone. If the students in an economic way, they vote with their dollars, they vote with their feet, if they stop going down there and there was no business coming into those bars, I think we'd make our point. Those are my two suggestions.
So
you may have others.
You've asked and answered the question, and I will refer you to a paper I wrote called The Geography of Opportunity, in which I actually deal with the incentives that exist in codes and regulatory functions that create these kinds of clustering of bars in certain areas. I actually written about this and worked with a group of students in the Dallas area on this many years ago. So I'm sensitive to it, and it is most definitely something that you have to deal with the regulatory function. Places don't just emerge out of thin air. They emerge because there are rules and codes and regulations that frame what you can do in geospace. And so I think you're on point with the partnership piece, and also I think I would add looking at the codes and the regulatory function.
Just as a quick addition, there are ordinances, et cetera.
Yes.
The city council, the police department does not choose to enforce them. And that's another part of the problem, just so you're aware. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Tate, we're running out of time, but
No.
do you mind if our two community members ask two quick questions and then you respond? Faculty, excuse me.
Hi, I'm Dave Crockett. I'm a professor of marketing and president of the Black Faculty Caucus. I want to first commend these students on what they have been doing. They've been at it since the beginning, and offer any help that I can give you. I would certainly be happy to do that. I want to maybe quickly follow up on a question that they asked. I suspect that both the search committee and other people who do this kind of work would all claim that they value excellence and that they look for excellence in their processes. And I certainly don't doubt your answer there, but I maybe would ask if you could be a little bit more specific in the kinds of things that you do that put equity and inclusion kind of at the center, particularly of faculty and staff, kind of hiring decisions, and other things along those lines.
So in 2014, my city was on fire. And I sat in a room a little smaller than this with University Council, and we were deciding what we were going to do in light of what was happening in Ferguson. It was the beginning of admission season for the next round where students were going to be visiting campus. There was a lot of tension and concern, obviously, in our community and at the university. The thing that I recommended, and we actually did, was that we had never taken the totality of all the research and programmatic efforts and the evaluation work related to diversity and inclusion and put a showcase together of that work and asked those people who do that kind of research, whether they were from medicine or business or law or social work, how their work was applicable to what we do at the university. I'm 100% sure if you gave me 12 hours, I could go through the CVs of the faculty and people who work here and find you 20 to 25 people who are really, really smart and good at this and have been writing about it for some time. And I guarantee you they've never been in the same room, that was the earlier question, and talked about their research and synthesized it and said, this is extremely important for our community. Well, we did that and have been doing it continuously. And part of the effort included me chairing a committee where we put together diversity and inclusion indicators and the technological infrastructure that has to go into any indicator system, the back end of it, and made recommendations to the university that we were going to do what? Because what's Bill Tate about? Putting that mirror up, that we were going to put the mirror up and see ourselves and see how we can improve. Look, this has been my life. If you look at my CV, this is what I do. It's who I am. It's the essence of who I am. And I say it without mincing. I came here wondering, do they know who I am? Mm-hmm. I wonder if they do, because that's what I do. That's my research. That's what I'm known for, looking at disparities and making a difference and creating a runway so everybody has a unique opportunity. So I would never take a job where that wasn't happening. It's the essence of me. So now you know, and you can operate accordingly. Thank you.
Hi. During your presentation, you talked about bringing the Midwestern model of being sort of a cultural community center to the University of South Carolina. I'm someone who, I'm sorry, you're looking surprised. Is
Did I
that
say
not
I
what
would
you
bring
meant?
the Midwest to the South? I'm trying to get away from the Midwest. I'm trying
Well,
to get down here with you.
for perspective, I went to the
Yeah.
University of Iowa for both of my degrees,
Oh,
but
okay.
I enjoyed very much having that kind of community university
Right.
cultural foundation where
Oh,
we were
okay.
able to see authors and astronomers talk and then interact with all
Right,
levels of
okay.
education and all different kinds of people. So what are some concrete steps you would use to bring that model here?
Where you're bringing together people from different areas and disciplines and talking, sort of the question, but you want outside people or people inside?
Well,
Or both?
I guess maybe I'm mistaken about what you're referring to, but just sort of the community engagement piece that you were talking about that you learned working.
So
in
when
the
I think of
upper
community
Midwest.
engagement, sometimes I think external, and then when I think about internal, I'm thinking about that's our academic engagement. So are we talking about the academic engagement or community engagement like my colleague was making reference to? I want to be clear on my answer.
Probably more external or something that's blended.
Well, that was a For Sake of All project that I was on, where we built a team of people who wanted to solve a problem together. So let's take liquor stores or bars, and you bring people together from the community who are interested in that, and then you bring public health people together and folks from social work and education, and you have them sit in a room and think about a strategy that might resolve that. That's the world I live in. You bring the people together, and we did that in St. Louis after Ferguson. We did it before in this research center I run. So it's a big part of the DNA in which I operate. I think it's a matter of just getting people in the room. You have folks here who are responsible for some of those things, but perhaps there needs to be a little nudge. And I think that would be the way to go. This can be pulled off. All these community problems should be part of our basic science. I mean, you're funded by the Morrow Act. You're supposed to be using your science and engineering and practical skills to solve real problems. That's the fundamental nature of the university. We're the brain regime. And so, yeah, that should be happening.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for an invigorating hour. I'm Mark Cooper. I teach media history and arts and sciences, and I'm also chair-elect of the Faculty Senate. So I really appreciated your remarks about shared governance. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say a little bit more about that in relationship to two of your Ps. The priorities piece. What processes or mechanisms do you think are effective for involving faculty in discussions of priorities? And then the pivot piece. When you need to pivot, what's the role of shared governance at that moment?
So I view this job, you have multiple bosses when you're president. Mm-hmm. And people don't really think about it that way. Yeah. I think that sometimes people imagine that these are unilateral decisions that happen. That's how you go up in smoke. I mean, you're just done. And so you have the trustees, and you have the state legislature, and you have the faculty council. And at WashU, we have faculty councils in each school, and then there's the university one. And the extent to which you're engaging about the vision of the university with those groups, and you also have your outside folks who are donors and the like. I mean, there's a lot of constituents. Mm-hmm. I think that the ideas have to be vetted through all of these groups, and you have to talk about what you're doing. When it's at a meta level, I'm not talking about the minutia, But the meta-level ideas, the big things that might require you to be able to move this huge mecca of an institution, you should be talking to the faculty about. Number one, if the faculty aren't bought in, it's not going to work. We've read a ton of articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education about an institution in the Southwest that wanted to do a huge curriculum change, right? And the faculty wasn't bought in. They bought a lot of books, but nothing changed, right? I mean, so, you know, in the end, it's about that kind of conversation and buy-in that you have to have at each level about what you're doing. And I think that's the most important part. As I stated earlier, being a Wisconsin, sort of, you know, being born there as a faculty member, it's just intuitive that I would want to do that and have those conversations. Moreover, what if you're saying something that just wouldn't work? And you haven't vetted it with people who, you know, you just have to do that. So I'm all in with that. I would want to work with the governance structure as it's currently configured, because I'm sure you have rules and bylaws and it's all set up in a way for you to engage it. And that would be the way to start. And if people thought there was a need to pivot from that, we could have conversations.
Thank you.
Dr. Tate, thank you so very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
referring to me as a colleague.